It's Michael Popok, and it's time for Legal AF After Dark. Now we get to talk about what happens after the decision and order against Donald Trump for almost $500 million, with $500,000 running in interest alone in the New York Attorney General case, because we're about to have the judgment entered against him, which means we're about to get to appeal and the enforcement of the judgment if he doesn't post a bond. We call it a supersedious bond. Then Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, is going to start taking buildings off him, take assets away from Donald Trump, take away paintings, take away planes and everything else, or he's got to post that bond. We talk about it all on Legal AF. Take a listen. First topic, which is right in your neck of the woods. I'll frame it and turn it over to my favorite former prosecutor on any network, Karen Friedman Agnifilo. So all that's left is the shouting. We've already got the judgment. In New York, we call it something different. I know sometimes we label it as the verdict or the judgment. It wasn't a verdict and it wasn't a judgment. A verdict comes from a jury. A judgment hasn't yet been entered. The thing that came out is what we in New York colloquially call the D&O, the decision and order. I can't tell you how many decisions and orders that Karen and I get in our cases from judges, and it looks just about that. This one was 92 pages. It went on with findings of fact because Judge Engoron was the trier of fact because there was no jury, and he made conclusions of law. That's what we call it. You find facts and you conclude law, applying the law to the facts. And then you have a remedy section usually, or a relief section, in which the judge spells out in the D&O what he wants to have happen next as a result. And here the judge was applying the remedies that are available under the case law of New York and the statute of executive law 63-12, which allows for disgorgement, which is the clawing back of ill-gotten gains, not damages, but money that somebody shouldn't have benefited, shouldn't have kept as a result of an unlevel playing field, in this case caused by fraud by Donald Trump. That's disgorgement. And then the ban that we've all talked about in prior hot takes and prior legal AFs, including over the weekend when we had all three anchors. All that gets reflected there at the end. The monitor, the use of the monitor, the expansion of her powers, the creation of the independent compliance director and his role or her role, all of that. That's all baked in there. But it's not a piece of paper that you can go and execute on and take to your local sheriff and say, hey, go collect the yacht, the boat, the art, the building, the money, the whatever, because I've got a judgment. Because if that were the case, the sheriff would say, let me see that piece of paper. Because they're looking for magic language which says a judgment entered by a clerk. And the D&O is not a judgment. And so now there's a fight about what the judgment should look like, which should not be a fight at all. We'll talk more about it when Karen comes in. But that's what we're waiting on. We're waiting for the judgment. Once the judgment is entered, which should reflect and be based on the 92 pages of the decision and order by Judge Engoron, then Letitia James can go execute on that and go take 40 Wall Street or whatever she said she's going to do to up to the amount of the judgment, which is running with substantial interest. I calculate it at about $400,000 to $500,000 per month until it's paid, and that interest keeps running even on appeal. In fact, if he posts a bond, which he'll have to do if he wants to stop the execution of the judgment once entered, the only way to stop that during the course of an appeal is to post a bond. We call it a supersedious bond. All it means is an appellate bond that stops the enforcement of the judgment temporarily while the parties continue to litigate on appeal. If you don't post a bond, and a lot of people don't or can't post a bond, they can't afford it, then assets can be collected. If the appeal is successful, the assets will have to be returned, but that's what happens in the interim. For right now, at least if you listen to Alina Habba, which I try not to, but if you listen to her false bravado, we have all the money, we have the $500 million, we're going to post it. All right, well, she's going to have to post 120% of the almost $500 million judgment as of a week ago. Plus, it's running with daily high interest. You have to project interest, compound that into the amount, and then you got to either get a sucker bet, get a bonding company who's going to lend you money on some asset that you think you have, which is all under the monitor of Barbara Jones, who's the federal judge that monitors all assets of Donald Trump, or you got to put up all the cash, all of it. And so that's a lot, even for Donald Trump, because he may have a lot of real estate that's valued at weird, inflated, manufactured numbers, but he doesn't have a lot of cash for a guy of that level. I mean, if he's got $400 million and $500 million in cash, that would be a lot. And the rest, he's going to have to go like hat in hand and sneaker on foot and whatever the heck else he's doing to try to collect new money and then use it to post his bond. So we're going to talk about all of that and this little fight that's going on. What are you making of, Karen, of this kind of move towards the judgment, post-judgment, execution on the judgment? And do you think, I'll leave it on this one, do you think that he's going to scrape up the $500 million or so and or get a bonding company to do it, at risk, if he doesn't, of losing one of his buildings?
So it's kind of fast. This whole part of the process is utterly fascinating to me and should be to everybody, because as you said, if he wants to appeal and he wants to make these arguments that he's been making about how the judge and the law secretary are somehow biased and that he didn't get a fair trial and all the things that he's been saying, it's fascinating to me that he's going to have to put up about 120% of this judgment, which will be about $500 million, right? He'll either have to put it up in cash or he'll have to borrow the money or get the money somewhere else through a bond. And what's fascinating about it is, if you remember, one of the parts of the judgment in Judge Engoron's ruling is that he can't borrow money from any lending institution, financial institution, a bank, or a financial institution that is chartered in New York. And most, if not all, are. And so that really limits where he can get money from. So so either he has cash in hand or he has to get a bond. And you ask yourself, who's going to give him a bond, right? It's some percentage of the money, but also it has to be secured by by a property up to the amount of the judgment. Now, bonds, people don't like real property. That's not something that typically they like to get or take because it's so fluid. And frankly, how would that even work, right? How would they even value the properties in order to secure the loan, given that so much of the valuation is fraudulent, because the entire ruling was based on the fact that these properties are fraudulent. These properties are also highly leveraged. So there isn't as much equity in each of the properties. It's not like he can just put one of them up. He'd probably have to put multiples of them up because they are so highly leveraged and have mortgages out on them. So it just poses a logistical problem. And then the final thing that I think is absolutely fascinating is, if you remember, on Saturday when the three of us did a Legal AF episode, and it was so fun doing it together. There was so much going on that week that it was just fun to all get on Legal AF while you were on your baby moon in the beautiful sunshine, Popok. So it was great that you, even on vacation, you work. You never stop working. But anyway, what's fascinating to me, and what I said on Saturday was, to me, the thing that was most significant about the judgment was the installation of Barbara Jones as the monitor, partly because she is so highly respected and she's a former federal judge, and she's just somebody who, even if Judge Engoron is, he writes very flowery and he's very dramatic and he has a colorful personality, and like many state court judges, sometimes gets reversed every once in a while, and Barbara Jones is one of those people who, in some ways, is bulletproof. She has a reputation that is regarded by all. So if she makes decisions about things, I think by putting her in the position of making decisions, I think it really makes his judgment almost bulletproof. But what's fascinating about it, and what's fascinating is in the context of what we're talking about, if Donald Trump wants to sell any assets to pay this judgment, he has to ask her permission. He has to go to her first, and he has to get her to agree, because she is the independent monitor who's going to be monitoring all the finances. And again, remember that this entire case is about fraud in these assets, right? It was all about based on fraud and lies about whether something is whether a building is fully occupied or whether something is residential versus commercial, right? Mar-a-Lago, he valued it as if it's a residential property, but it's actually commercially. It's a commercial property that has to be for all time, and or the size of one of the apartments that was triple the size. It's all lies. So it's just going to be fascinating to see how logistically he does this and how he does it in 30 days. Right? He only has 30 days to appeal, and if he wants to appeal, he has to do that. He also has to make a calculation, a business calculation. Does he want to do this and accrue all this interest, right? What is it? I read somewhere it was $87,000 a day, and it's compounding interest, which means that number goes up, right? Because it gets added on to the total, and that whole thing is then the interest is compounded over time. So from a business perspective, is he going to do that? So I find it more just fascinating. How is it going to play out where the ill-gotten gains, these profits that he has to disgorge because of his persistent business fraud that happened. How is he going to logistically do this? So go ahead.
What I loved about Engoron's decision is that it reminds me of Gulliver's Travels, where the Lilliputians just pin down Gulliver. He wakes up and he's just pinned down, and it wasn't by accident that Engoron gave the monitor Barbara Jones more robust powers, established a director, an independent director of compliance, meaning somebody that has to install and make sure that proper control functions are present within the organization, and all of Donald Trump's assets are not just kind of loose in the ether; they all exist within his trusts, and the trusts are also part of what Barbara Jones gets to keep an eye on. So you're right. It's not, he's going to have to get permission, because now he has to ask in advance the monitor, not just report after the fact. That's one of the other changes in the order. And he can't just like sell off a piece of property, because he did that before to her, and she had a report that they're not respecting the monitor. That won't happen anymore, because if it does, they're going to run into court for contempt, because the judge will have ongoing jurisdiction over this matter in case he screws up. It's not just going to be Barbara Jones going, please, and writing increasingly nastier letters. She has a recourse. She is a court officer that's been appointed, and she will run back to Engoron. And so where does he come? But he has no choice from a business standpoint. If he doesn't post the 500 million plus, 120% of 500 million that he either gets in cash or a combination of a bonding company giving him credit, which is dicey right now, considering he's just got convicted of 7 counts of fraud in his financial statements concerning his assets. So what bonding company in their right mind is going to lend money? Maybe a MAGA bonding company. So maybe he gets half floated to him in a loan secured by whatever assets he can figure out what he can pledge. And then he has to, because if he doesn't post it, Karen, then Letitia James has already been on ABC News giving an interview yesterday, and a couple of us did a hot take on it, where she said, oh no, yes, I heard when Donald Trump in his depositions and Don Jr. said, oh, you want to see one of our buildings? Open your window. There it is, 40 Wall Street. See that big, beautiful building across the street? She says, yeah, that big, beautiful building across the street is across the street from my office too. That's how windows work. I see it. And that would be the first place I'm going to go. Here, Mr. Sheriff, here's the judgment. Go put a padlock on 40 Wall Street and sell it at auction. And then you only get up to the amount, but the amount is like running. So they sell 40 Wall Street for, let's say, $100 million or even $300 million. He's still short. So she goes to Trump Tower, and she goes and takes the triplex, whatever size it is. And then, okay, we're still short, and the interest is still running, because the interest is still running until every last dime of that judgment is paid. Okay, I've been involved with my law firm in going after assets for huge judgments. One of the things that my law firm does, for instance, down in Miami, shout out to my partners, is that we have an anti-terrorism practice, which is what it sounds like. We go after terrorist organizations and collect on behalf of victims of terrorism. And my partners are expert at finding the money in United States banks and getting it and back to the victim. So if you ever want to find out how to go seize a building, a boat, big bank accounts, my partners in Miami know how to do that. So, and I've done it. I've done it in the past too. I've seized a yacht. And so that's what you got to do. And you have the right to continue to go. You can't get more than your judgment with calculated compounded interest, but you don't get less either until.
By the way, I love your visual. I've seized a yacht. I'd love to see that.
Yacht.
I have a question for you. So what would, yeah, I just saw in the comments, someone said, take his plane. I guess, yeah, that's something, it's worth some money. I have a question for you. I've read somewhere that people say that, that he can declare bankruptcy and so can you just take us through all that? What does that do to this?
Well, because he's a recidivist. He's filed for bankruptcy. I was on I did a take with Michael Cohen. I'm going to be on Mea Culpa with him. We talked about it because Michael was there for most of it. He's declared bankruptcy 5 times. If people think he's some sort of not our people, other people think he's some sort of superstar business person. He never was that. The only person that was a successful developer in that family was named Fred, and he inherited his first 500 million. And then, look what he did with it, including a persistent fraud in his operation and almost overthrew democracy. So he's one of the few people in America or in the world that found a way to declare bankruptcy 3 times running, three of the times running casinos in the United States that manufacture money, where the house always wins. He found a way to put multiple Atlantic City properties into bankruptcy. And he was at one point, when I was a young adult and kept an eye on Donald Trump before I knew I was going to have a podcast one day, he was put on an allowance of $50,000 a month back in the 80s by a bankruptcy judge. And at the time I thought, wow, that's his allowance? That's crazy. But so he's no stranger to bankruptcy code. The problem with bankruptcy is all roads lead back to Barbara Jones. He is not just going to be able to file. There's something called bad faith filing in bankruptcy, and it's a bad thing. And so you have to have your debts have to exceed your liabilities. I'm sorry, your liabilities have to, where am I tonight? Your liabilities have to exceed your assets. Let's try that. Okay. And so Donald Trump, who claims to be a $3 billionaire, okay, last I looked, 3 billion is bigger than 500 million. So he doesn't have the ability to file for bankruptcy. Rudy Giuliani's a different story. He has a $148 million judgment against like a fuzzy lifesaver in his pocket, 42 bucks and change, a bunch of old cigars and a watch. He is a perfect candidate for bankruptcy, not for intentional torts. So I don't think it works for him. But so let me just say it this way. That idle speculation about bankruptcy, despite the fact that Donald Trump filed for it before, that's because the individual entities that he owned, Trump Resorts, Trump Palace, Trump this, Trump that, they were technically bankrupt because their liabilities exceeded their assets. But we're talking about Trump Org, Trump Donald, and Trump, trust. They're not, because even though he's not liquid in the sense of cash, he claims to have, you can't have it both ways. You can't stand up in court under oath and then in the case involving E. Jean Carroll, which came out with sworn testimony, and tell the world that you're a multi-billionaire and then run to a bankruptcy court for protection. So I don't even think that. I've given it more time here than's necessary. He doesn't have the grounds to go bankrupt, and that would be a bad faith filing. And the creditors could go in there and convince the trustee and the bankruptcy judge that it's a bad faith filing, and that's a bad thing, including a crime. I don't think Donald Trump's doing that. He's either going to scrape up the money, I don't know from where, including from MAGA and PACs, although they're almost busted at the present time. And he's got to post this money in T-minus like 25 days. Well, I think it actually starts when the judgment is entered, and the judgment hasn't yet been entered. So let's say the judgment is entered in the next 4 or 5 days. He's got until the end of March, beginning of April to scrape up the cash. And if he doesn't, I am sure that Letitia James and her crew are working hand in glove with the sheriff to, like, the day he misses that deadline, to go seize an asset.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Will we know when the E. Jean Carroll, because that clock is ticking, the
Yes.
E. Jean Carroll 83 million, will we know whether when he posts that?
Yep. Yes, and you're right. That's on a different time track. He's got to post 83 and a half plus interest at 120%. It's like another $100+ million. The last time he had an E. Jean Carroll judgment, because he loves E. Jean, he likes collecting E. Jean Carroll judgments. He likes defaming her as a misogynist, and then she gets new judgments against him. Well, the one from last May, the last time we were on vacation, remember that one? He posted cash because it was only 5.2 million. So he's like, oh, I got that. That's like my grandfather used to call it. That's my folding money. I always make Trump sound like Foghorn Leghorn from the old Warner Brothers cartoons. I don't know why, but he's I got it right here in my pocket, because he didn't want to go for the bonding, because you got to apply and post assets. Now, all Letitia James has to do is go to Barbara Jones and say, can you hit print and print out for me all of the bank accounts, all of the assets? Because she knows. She knows where all the money is hidden.
She knows where all the bodies are buried.
14 months of being a
Really?
15 months of being the monitor. This is the easiest collection that Letitia James will ever have. And you will see her with a big smile on her face, rightly so. Because Letitia James, just to do a shout out to her for a minute, about strong women taking down corrupt men, which is a good thematic on the show, especially when you and I are teamed up here, is that Letitia James is going to take down in 2024 Donald Trump, financially and otherwise, and the National Rifle Association, which, I used to lose sleep over the NRA and their impact on policy. And she's going to put both out of business in 1 year. I mean, I don't know what she wants to do after the Attorney General position, but she's going to have quite a body of work to run on, don't you think?
Yeah. No, she's amazing. We're very lucky to have her.
Absolutely. So we'll continue to follow on hot takes and updates about when the judgment is finally entered and the clock is running and the money posted for Donald Trump, which will exhaust all of his cash. And speaking of cash, there's a calculation that he'll be out of all the money in all his PACs to pay his attorney's fees by July. So this is one of the reasons he's very upset with Nikki Haley, because every dollar he's got to spend there, and every dollar he has to pay on his attorney's fees and post bonds, is one less dollar to go against Joe Biden in the general election. I'm telling you, when those numbers come out as we round into the summer, Joe Biden's going to have a $500 million advantage in terms of fundraising. It's going to be like 500 to 200 million.
You don't think he's going to sell all the $500 million worth of shoes?
By the way, okay, he didn't design them. He doesn't own the company that's selling them. It's a licensor. Just like,
by the way, they're ugly too. I mean,
I'll tell you who's not wearing it. The kids that are in the Kicks market who booed him mercilessly at Philadelphia SneakerCon are not wearing these things. I saw Brett posted on, maybe it was just internal with us. Oh no, he put it on his social media feed. There's some artist did a custom version of the Midas Brothers on a pair of Air Force Ones, like Jordans. And he's like, these are much cooler than those. But the whole thing, the fact that he did it the day after the judgment came out, that's such whistling past the graveyard. Such like, I'll just sell 1,000 shoes. That'll pay no, it won't.
Yeah, he needs the money. I mean, clearly. So I also saw a GoFundMe, and I also saw somewhere, who knows if any of this is even true, but that Louboutin, those shoes that have the red bottom, that they're going to sue him for the red bottom sneakers. I mean, it's just crazy.
He needs another suit. And then the last thing before we turn to our next topic is, people are also worried, Joe Biden's Securities and Exchange Commission approved finally the merger of Truth Social, media company that Trump owns 98% of, with a public company. And there's a bunch of suckers there that invested on this thing. And on paper, Trump could get, I've seen the number. It's like ridiculous, like $2 or $3 or $4 billion. However, there's a lot. We'll talk about it at another time. He has to hold it for a year. And if he's a twice convicted felon by then who's lost the presidential election, I'm not sure he's getting $4 billion for Truth Social. I'll just leave it at that. Do you have any?
It also doesn't help him right now when he needs
right. That's again, he's pushing up his nose at the candy store. Can't get that money fast enough.
And by the way, just back to the bond issue, and then we'll move to the next topic or to an ad. Probably Salty's probably saying it's time for an ad. But one more thing is, the other reason no one's going to bond him is, what if, God forbid, he wins the presidency? You can't. What are you going to go after the president's one of his real estate holdings or his residence? I mean, it's just logistically, it's not possible. He's going to have to come up with this cash somehow.
Imagine the bonding company padlocking the White House. That's not going to happen, though. I don't want to have that hellscape in my mind, because that's not.
I know, but it's just when you think through all the different, if you're a bondsman, that's what you're thinking, right?
Well, if you like lawyers talking about things at the intersection of law, politics, and justice, where they know what they're talking about, you've reached the right place on MeidasTouch's dial. Legal AF. The title is exactly what you think. We do it every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on this YouTube channel. If you know all about us and you're already in our audience, we thank you from the bottom of our pod. Take that clip, though. That's a great way to introduce new people to our show. It's not a big time commitment, 10 minutes or so. Send it off to them. Say, that show I love, Legal AF. Here's a clip from it, and see if we can get them to join our audience. If you don't know what I'm talking about, and you don't know this content on the MeidasTouch Network, that was Legal AF. I'm Michael Popok, and we do that, let's say times 5. We curate 4 or 5 stories, news analysis, legal and political, at the intersection of that law, politics, and justice. We do it twice a week. And we invite you to join us and become part of our audience. So until the next hot take and until the next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.